let's get on brand. This is an interview series where we discuss how design can enhance your organization's impact. And today I'm super excited to have Meghan Lamkin with us. We were actually UCF graduates together in the design program. So that was now 5 years ago, which feels crazy. But Meghan has become an owner and founder of Meghan Lamkin Design. So she's a freelance graphic designer who specializes in brand identities for nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and small businesses. So we have a lot of alignment, which is really cool, and I'm excited to kick off this conversation. But since 2021, she's crafted meaningful visual identities that reflect her clients' values while also bringing stories to life for her love for editorial and magazine design, which I'm really happy to have her here. So Meghan, please just share how you got to where you are today and your kind of your journey and what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first off. Yeah, so after we graduated, I ended up getting just a normal 9 to 5 corporate job. It was at a nonprofit in the construction industry. So a little bit different kind of a nonprofit. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out. I ended up leaving there after only a few months. And after that, I was kind of trying to figure out like what to do. It was also kind of in the middle of COVID, which, job market was a little bit tough then. So then I eventually kind of dipped my toes into freelancing and then eventually decided like this is what I want to do full time. And then I stuck with that ever since.
That's so cool. And when you started freelancing, because freelancing really isn't for everybody. We worked with lots of designers who did it, who didn't. What kind of made you take that leap into doing freelance work?
I think I've always wanted to do it. It was always a long-term goal of mine. My older brother is actually a web developer, and he's quite a bit older than me. So he was already working, for a few years by the time I had graduated. And so I had seen how he got to grow his business and the kind of work that he was taking on. And it ultimately inspired me to want to do that as well, but in a more traditional graphic design route. Um, so like I said, I didn't really feel like I could do it fresh out of school because it's definitely not the easiest route, like you just said. But I eventually was starting to get jobs on Upwork, small jobs like social media posts and web banners and things like that. From there, I eventually got connected with a client in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. And I actually still work with them. So we've had a very long working relationship. But that was how I got into working with churches and faith-based organizations and nonprofits. They eventually started referring branding projects to me for churches that were in their diocese. So that's kind of how I got started. Um, yeah, after that, I kind of just realized that I really like working with those types of organizations. It's nice to work with people who really care about what they're doing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I've stuck with it. And I like feeling like I can use my creative skills to put some good out into the world, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And I think there's a unique sense of kind of pride and accomplishment that comes with helping nonprofits and churches and these small businesses because it means so much more in a way. At least
Yes,
for me, like you mentioned,
yes.
I'm a part of their mission helping them and they're getting
Mhm.
out there. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of them are so involved in their community and it is a church, but they do so much more.
mhm.
And so it's really cool to see like my design work helping impact so many different areas.
Yeah. And what's been that process like? Because you mentioned you were doing full branding projects for these churches. You may be starting off with web banners or something more simple. How was that process of going from something simple as maybe a web banner to then a full branding process with them?
I think time, as obviously as you're taking on smaller projects, there's less for you to mess up.
Very true.
But as they kind of realize like, hey, she's not going to mess this up, they started referring bigger projects to me, which has been really awesome because, it's been 4 years now. And as we've grown that working relationship, it's really blossomed into working with, so many organizations that they're involved with, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's like you're exposed to this massive network of
Yeah,
there's like other nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. So, and
yeah,
you mentioned earlier, you're like, oh, that's my design on there, which is really cool because you can help all
yeah.
these organizations. So, what's been maybe one of your favorite projects so far? I know we're just starting our conversation, but when you think of a project that you felt was really meaningful for you, which one comes to mind?
So this is one I actually haven't posted on my Instagram yet, but I will now that we're talking about it.
Amazing.
But it was actually a 24-page printed booklet for a church called St. Paul's in Richmond, Virginia. So they're a pretty large church. They're central to downtown. And their theme for the year has been All Find a Welcome. And they're very much about how they're inclusive to everybody. They want to welcome everybody. And so this was a booklet that's talking about their fall and winter programming, but it also just goes into all the things that they're involved with in Richmond, Virginia. Their logo, which I actually didn't design, is it's like a stained glass dove. And what I did was I expanded on the cover and used all of their colors and incorporated all the faces from their church in the panels. So we also assigned the colors to have each of their five like highlights of their mission and use that throughout it. So it's a really cool little booklet. It got mailed out throughout Richmond, and yeah, I'm really proud of it. So I'll have to share it soon now.
Yes. Will you be getting a physical copy as well?
I should ask them because I actually didn't ask them. They did send me some pictures of it and it looks awesome.
That's so awesome. And just seeing your work in person is really refreshing. And then the fact that it's this thing that they've been building up to all year and you're like, hey, I helped be a part of that. So
Yeah, and they sent me the nicest feedback after I sent them the initial draft. He was like, I just feel like you understand what we're doing so well. And sometimes it makes me tear up a little bit when you send me the draft. And that just like made my whole week because that's what we set out to do.
yeah. Well, and you've spent so much time building trust and that relationship and taking the time to explain your choices and why you're doing it and the thought behind your part and helps with their thought, right? They've already put in all this work and you're saying, "Hey, I'm also gonna admire what you've done and put it into this work." So that's really awesome that they had that feedback for you.
Yeah, it's like taking their mission and making it look as beautiful as it sounds.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that completely because there's a stigma in the nonprofit and the church world, right? Which they are nonprofits as well, that it's like because they have a mission, sometimes their design is really ugly because
Yes.
it's like the
Yes.
afterthought. Like like you could think of one probably.
Yes.
And it's challenging because they do have good things to put into the community or to share, and it's really often overlooked by so many because it looks either tacky or like a scam or just
Hmm.
not visually appealing where it's giving across the right information, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we talk about, this issue that's in this space, how have you worked with your clients to kind of overcome this barrier and maybe educating them on the process?
Yeah, a lot of them definitely do need education, especially on branding, because to them, a lot of them think it's just a logo. They don't understand that branding is so much more than that. It is the logo, but it's a whole system. It's your messaging, it's your tone of voice, it's all of the fun accompanying icons and colors and all that stuff. And so I do try to educate them a bit on that, on how when you're consistent across all these platforms, it's going to help you grow and it's also going to help people trust you more.
Absolutely. And it's funny when you mention it's like, yeah, it's not just this logo. And when sometimes what I do with my clients is I point out like really well-established brands, right? Just if you
Mhm.
think of like Target, for instance, right? You know what they look like, it's red. So if they start using colors like blue and green in their main messaging, you might feel, oh, like this doesn't fit. And it's really easy to see when their branding is not good. So when you help compare it, like, hey, you Target would never do this. Why would you?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And to like, I also try to offer services to my clients that help them have more accessible design choices. So templates on Canva are huge. I'll try to make, custom templates for them or anything that can make it easier for them to stay on brand without, hiring me on a retainer or hiring someone else on a retainer because a lot of them just don't have the resources or the budget for that.
Mhm.
I think it's important to also be mindful of their resources and try to make it accessible for everyone.
Yeah. And that's huge because there are a lot of resources out there, like you mentioned, those Canva templates. And when you have an intentional designer building that then they can use seamlessly, it just helps and it helps them be confident in using their brand. I think
Hmm.
that's a challenge with one of my clients when I first started working with him was he just didn't know how to use his brand. He actually had a
Hmm.
logo and colors and it was pretty solid, but it was how is this more than just a logo and colors, right? How does this become a brand? So
Hmm.
what are maybe some unique challenges that you find with maybe more nonprofits and churches than opposed to maybe the small businesses that you work with? Maybe what is unique about them?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of unique challenges, and I definitely didn't always understand how to tackle them when I was first starting out because there's not a lot of great examples of church branding or designers that really work with those types of brands.
Mhm.
But I would say the one thing that comes up again and again is that they know that they need to modernize and they want it, but they're also afraid of letting go of certain parts of their original brand. So finding a way to compromise on those can be tough.
It's true because that's that nostalgia and that maybe there's more than one person too making this decision. So it's not just one person who's calling the shots sometimes. So yeah, that's been definitely a very difficult thing to
Yes.
navigate. And have you had to navigate that before with a client? Yeah.
Yes. I would say with most of them. But like I guess how I try to tackle it is I try to ask them what's the main priorities, what's the must-haves, what's the can we maybe get rid of this
Mhm.
and go about it that way. And I always try to return to the why, why are we doing this? What is the goal? And that usually helps kind of narrow things down because, like you said too, sometimes it's more than one person making the decision. And that can be hard too, because then there's, lots of different feedback coming at me.
Yeah.
And you have to prioritize what's going to make it the most successful.
Absolutely. And it's our job as designers, right, to going back to educating them, like, okay, what
Mhm.
are you trying to say? And this is not what you're saying right now. It's
Yes.
kind of making that clear to them sometimes is interesting for all kinds of clients, right? It's like, okay, what do you want to say? And then are you saying it right now? I think is a big hurdle and mindset shift a lot of them have to go through. And if you could give some advice to maybe organizations in that mindset that you mentioned, right? Kind of in that, okay, we need to modernize, but we don't really want to let go or we don't know how. What advice would you give for an organization struggling with that mindset?
I would say have a clear strategy from the start. That is like the most important thing because that's your base work of the goals of the project. What do we want this outcome to be? So first off, have that strategy and have it so that everybody can refer back to it when you might reach a bump in the road. Then I would also say just have trust in your designer. Yes, we are designers where we create the visuals and we make it look nice, but we are also consultants in a lot of ways and be open to our ideas. There's a reason why we're telling you what we're telling you.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just have trust and it'll work itself out, but having a groundwork to refer back to is very important.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, having that strategy from the start saves so much headache later because when you start with strategy, right, or who we're talking to, what's the purpose and the goal, then the design matches and mirrors that strategy and everything else after that. So it becomes less of a headache. I know a lot of people that I deal with, they don't know what to do in their other marketing material, right? If it's a bulletin, if it's a flyer, it's like it all looks different. So when you start from that, okay, we have our goals and mission and what we know, then everything else kind of just falls into place, it feels like, right?
Yeah, yeah, it totally does. And then eventually too, when you're building on your branding guidelines,
Mhm.
it's kind of already set up for you. You just have to add the visual parts to it.
Absolutely. And then it gives them that confidence that it's like, okay, we can make a flyer or something
Yes.
and we have an idea. So it gives them that
Exactly.
confidence too. Also, it builds trust with their community. I think that's something that they don't realize sometimes till after the fact, or like you mentioned, it's like, okay, we need to modernize because we're not reaching the right group, or maybe we're just outdated. And then once they do it, they realize, wow, this built trust. Like people recognize us now. So have you
Yeah.
had an experience with a client where maybe they felt that, where they felt that recognizability or trust with their community?
Yeah, I think so for sure. Especially too, sometimes specifically with church branding,
Mhm.
I like to try to make an icon for them that's based on something physical. Like it could be like the front door of their church or their stained glass window or something like that that people can, instantly recognize. Um, and so when you have that, someone that maybe isn't a part of their church but drives by it all the time, they might recognize it and be like, "Oh, I know them. They're around the block from me." And so I think just having that local presence is also important in building trust because people automatically are going to associate you with the brand.
Absolutely. And that's part of that reputation that they're creating. And so when you
Mhm.
play a part in that, it's like, okay, this is how we're showing up. You're building that credibility with your community. So then when people, maybe it's the fifth, sixth, hundredth time they've driven by, they see that door or that unique element and they see it somewhere else. They're like, wait a second, I know that. Like that recognizability comes to play. So
Mhm.
that's really unique and I think a great strategy as well, just having that icon or that symbol be there that they could be like, oh, I know that church or I know that organization.
Yeah, and I think it works too because they're pretty much all unique. They all have something that would work for that. So yeah, it's worked well.
So, what has been in your experience, just maybe it's something that's challenging for this space, whether it's small businesses or nonprofits, to kind of implement, right? Maybe it's in your when you're starting or maybe later, but what has been the hardest part for them to implement?
Something I hear often is that they are very afraid of how their community is going to accept the change. So if it's a rebrand, if we're starting from something else, a lot of them are very fearful of making too much of a change. And I understand that, but also sometimes you need to make a change for it to have a greater impact. Um, and that's a hard one because sometimes, people listen, sometimes they don't, and they just want to stick with what they know. Um, but that is definitely a big challenge that comes up pretty often.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned earlier this same aspect about fear, right? Fear that of change. How do you
Mhm.
overcome that with a client? Because it's not just, okay, like, yeah, like we don't want to, we don't have the budget. Like fear is a very different kind of different mindset we have to be in because
Yes.
that consultant hat is on, right? You're like, okay, now I'm your therapist. Like, let's go. But how do
Well,
you
yeah, there's no easy way to deal with it, to be honest. I mean, sometimes it just requires kind of a difficult conversation. But, at the end of the day, like they're hiring us to tell them what they need to grow.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell myself, even if we have to have kind of a hard conversation where I'm like, hey, this is not really in your best interest.
Really.
And it's something that's definitely gotten easier the longer that I've done it.
Mhm.
Um, but ultimately we both want things to be successful and we both want things to grow or whatever the goal is. And so that's what I tell myself. And sometimes we just have to have a little bit of a difficult conversation about it.
Like that's so well said. It's true, right? You kind of have to, it's not convince them in a way, but see what the outcomes are. Like you mentioned earlier, right? What are the outcomes of this? What is the purpose and the goal? And I think when they're reminded of that, it helps with clarity in moving forward. And really amplifying their mission, right? So it's like that at the heart of a lot of these organizations. They want their mission to be known by others, and maybe there's donations involved for like nonprofits, maybe there's just attendance, whatever the goal is, right? It's like, okay, is your
Mhm.
design, is your mission, is your voice aligned with that? So
Mhm.
definitely a challenge and not easy.
No.
That's why we were chosen for this industry.
Right.
So amazing. But for organizations that are kind of just starting out, right? If you were maybe to meet with a brand new organization, they're trying to figure it out, how would you help them understand how design builds that trust? What is maybe a thing that you would tell them or something you would do?
I liked what you said earlier about showing them examples. I think that is very helpful, especially when it's a brand that they know well. So that's one thing. I would also just show them, well, more specific examples that I've done too. Because like I said, there's not a ton of church branding examples out there.
Mhm.
So try to show them like, hey, we did this and, look at where it led us. Um, that's always helpful. I think a lot of people are really visual learners and visual people. So that's probably the best way, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's true. Sadly, there's not so many church branding examples out there. There's like a few, and then it's almost like a monopoly because they just do
Yeah.
all of them. They're fantastic, but it's definitely a different level there. But that's really cool that those examples help. And for those who would want to work with you, what's kind of your process and how would you like take them through a process and what do they need to do?
Yeah. So I always try to start out with a call and we go over what they're looking for, what their ideas are, all that fun stuff.
All the
Um,
inquiries.
yeah. And then I always have them fill out a branding questionnaire. So it goes through a lot of the same things, their goals, their mission, their target audience, all that fun stuff. And then from there, I would start with coming up with mood boards or coming up with some sort of visual to give them a direction that we could go in. Um, from there, I would come up with the initial concept and mock it up, make it look all pretty for them. And then present it to them, and then we go from there. I sometimes just do one concept, sometimes I do multiple concepts. It kind of depends on what they're looking for.
Awesome. Well, it's a very streamlined process, and I think a part of this, as you mentioned, is it's visual, right? So we're showing them what they can be, what they can become, and I think it's important for them to see that, especially like in mock-ups or things like that, to get that visual out there. So that's very cool. Is
Yeah.
in all of this, what have you kind of learned about yourself as you've dealt with clients and kind of managing your own business too?
Oh, that's a good question. I've learned a lot about myself. I'm sure every business owner would tell you that. It has taught me a lot of patience, a lot of patience. You have to deal with a lot of different types of people, and I think it's good to sometimes take a step back and take a deep breath and be like, this is gonna work out. But definitely having some patience. Um, let's see what else. I've also learned about myself that I like working with a lot of different people. I do focus on, churches, nonprofits, and small businesses, but I'm really open to working with anyone if the vibes are right.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, and I think it's important to love what you do every day. So I don't think I would ever go back to working for someone else. And yeah, freelancing is great.
I agree. It's not for everybody, but it is very rewarding. And like you mentioned, it's challenging, but I, for me personally, I love the challenge of just figuring it out, just looking to other people like yourself to kind of be like, hey,
Mhm.
what are you doing? Am I doing the same? How can we help each other? And just building this community of just trying to figure it out. And I think it's fun in all of this.
Yeah, I do too. And then I get to do cool things like come and talk to you.
Exactly. It's so awesome. But Megan, honestly, it's been so fun catching up and learning about your journey and also how you help these different organizations. Like I said, we're in such a similar niche, and I'm so happy about that because we can bounce ideas off each other and just help more companies and organizations and all of that fun stuff. But if those who are watching, if you'd like to follow Megan on Instagram, it's Meghan Lamkin Design. And then her website is meghanlamkin.com. But this is Let's Get on Brand, where mission meets design. And thank you for being a part of this conversation. We will have more conversations. And if you have any questions for me or for Megan, feel free to just message either of us. So thank you guys so much.